think you could be a knight? Maybe you've pictured it, galloping into battle, sword in hand, banner snapping in the wind. Honor, chivalry, glory. Forget it, you wouldn't survive a week, because becoming a medieval knight wasn't some epic quest. It was decades of brutal training, constant violence, crushing exhaustion, and a life lived in pain. The movies got one thing right. It looked cool. Everything else? Lies. You didn't just become a knight, you were born into it. Not noble? Tough. You'd never even qualify, and even if you were lucky enough to be born into the right family, that just meant your nightmare started earlier. At age 7, you left your home to become a page. Not a student, a servant. You waited on lords, cleaned stables, fetched wine, and stood silently while grown men discussed matters far above your head. You were beaten for speaking out of turn, whipped for disobedience, mocked for weakness. You learned to read just enough to pray. You practiced sword forms until your arms gave out. You watched knights break bones and bleed through their armor, and you were expected to become one of them. At 14, you became a squire. Translation: you were the knight's personal servant and his training dummy. You sharpened his weapon, saddled his horse, polished his gear, and took the blows he didn't want to. You carried his shield into battle. You dragged him off the field if he fell. You learned to gut a man before you learned to shave. Still sound romantic? Let's talk about the armor. That shining steel suit everyone loves. It weighed up to 70 pounds. That's like strapping a full-grown child to your body and then sprinting toward a wall of spears. Wearing armor wasn't just uncomfortable, it was lethal. On hot days, knights collapsed from heat stroke. Dehydration could kill you before a blade ever touched you. One misstep in mud and you were a turtle on your back. Easy prey. And no, you couldn't just run it off. Every movement cost energy. Climbing onto a horse felt like scaling a wall. Fighting in it? Imagine doing CrossFit in a sauna while someone swings a hammer at your head. By the way, knights didn't fight every day, but they trained constantly. Wrestling, swordplay, horsemanship, archery, hunting. Every day was another chance to sprain a joint or shatter a bone. Because being out of shape meant one thing: death. Even in training, knights got hurt, often. Broken fingers, dislocated shoulders, cracked ribs, sword hilts slamming into mouths, teeth flying out, eyes gouged during practice. One English knight wrote that he broke 6 lances in a single joust. That sounds impressive until you realize each break involved bone-jarring impact that could easily knock you out or snap your neck. Jousting wasn't sport, it was armed assault. And if you actually went to war, that was worse. Knights bled a lot. They lost fingers, teeth, toes. They drowned in ditches. They burned in their own armor when castles caught fire. They got trampled, flanked, hacked to pieces. And if they were captured, ransom was an option. If you were noble enough. Otherwise, expect slow death in a filthy cell. Remember, this was long before deodorant or hygiene. A knight wore layers: padded linen, a gambeson, chainmail, and then plate. The gambeson soaked up sweat, blood, and infection. It was rarely washed. It reeked. Armor chafed your skin raw. Pressure sores festered under your armpits and thighs. You often had open wounds and no antibiotics. Knights weren't glorious warriors. They were walking infections. And their breath? Rotting meat, bad ale, and whatever teeth they hadn't lost yet. Ah yes, chivalry. That noble code of honor. The truth? It mostly applied to how knights treated other knights, peasants. Fair game. Knights burned villages, raped women, slaughtered civilians. They didn't see the poor as human. They were spoils, livestock. Chivalry was a club, and if you weren't born noble, you weren't in it. Even in war, honor was a loose term. Knights killed prisoners, backstabbed allies, poisoned wells. They raided monasteries. They tortured. They bragged about it. So if you thought you could become a knight and stay moral, think again. Weight of the armor, up to around 30 kilograms. Knights serving in active war zones typically had a life expectancy reaching only their mid-30s. They often died from infections, blunt force trauma, or heat stroke. As for chivalry, it generally did not extend to peasants. Still think you make a great knight? Then grab your sword, say goodbye to hygiene, and prepare to get your face caved in by a mace, because the life of a knight wasn't about courage, it was about enduring endless pain. Just to die for someone richer than you. You've trained for years, you've earned your armor. Now comes the real test, war. You think it's going to be epic like the movies, clean duels, strategic charges, dramatic speeches? No. It's panic, it's chaos, it's metal smashing flesh. You scream inside a helmet so loud no one hears it. You swing a sword that barely cuts through padded armor. You kill or you die in mud, blood, and terror. Because medieval warfare wasn't noble. It was a butcher's yard. When a battle started, you didn't get formations and clean lines. You got mud, confusion, noise, and fear. Infantry slammed into each other shoulder to shoulder. You didn't have room to swing properly. You just bashed and stabbed at anything moving and prayed it wasn't one of yours. Visibility was garbage. Your helmet blocked most of your vision. The smoke from burning fields filled your lungs. Arrows rained down. And no, armor didn't make you invincible. Plate helped until it didn't. A longbow arrow could punch through mail. A halberd could tear into your side. And if you fell, good luck getting up. You were trampled by your own men or finished off by a dagger in the eye slit. There were no clean kills. There was no mercy. Once someone was down, others stabbed them until they stopped moving. Or moving meant trouble. Let's talk about what no one mentions, the fear. Knights didn't fight calmly. They shook. They vomited. They screamed in battle frenzy or cried afterward. The smell? Burnt hair, excrement, rotting flesh, wet leather. Every battle was a stew of blood and panic. You didn't know who would kill you. A farmer with a pitchfork could end you, or a teenager with a rock, or your horse falling and crushing your ribs. And once the fighting ended, it didn't get better. Because the aftermath was somehow worse. If you survived the melee, you weren't lucky, just delayed. No medics, no stretchers, no evacuation plans. If you were wounded, you crawled or were left behind. If your armor was valuable, looters stripped you while you screamed. They didn't care if you were alive. They hacked it off with knives. Your limbs went with it. No clean hospital tents, just open fields full of flies. No antibiotics, no painkillers, just cauterization. Heated iron pressed to flesh to stop the bleeding. Infection followed. Fever, gangrene, delirium, death. Many knights died hours, days, or weeks later. In agony. Not all fighting happened in open fields. Sieges were worse. Imagine living in a castle surrounded by enemies for weeks. Food runs out, water goes foul, rats become meals, the smell of rot fills the air, disease spreads. Then the final assault comes. And it's not strategic. It's desperate. Screaming men pile up ladders. Defenders pour boiling pitch, throw stones, shoot crossbows. Once the walls are breached, the killing begins. And knights? They were first in. You climbed ladders while arrows flew past your head. You kicked through splintered doors while flames crawled behind you. You slipped in blood, shoved corpses out of the way, and fought in stairwells until your arms gave out. Victory didn't mean safety. It meant plundering or being stabbed in the back by someone faster. If you were on the losing side, no mercy. Prisoners were tortured, civilians raped or executed, entire towns burned. Let's get real about the tools of the trade. A knight's sword wasn't a sleek fencing foil. It was heavy, brutal, and rarely sliced clean. It crushed more than it cut. Warhammers? They caved in helmets. Morning stars spiked through mail. Flails broke arms and shattered ribs. Lances impaled you clean through, but often didn't kill you outright. And the crossbow? It was a game changer, and hated by the elite. It pierced armor at long range and required no training. Pope Innocent X called it unfit for Christians to use, because it made killing too easy. Medieval weapons weren't elegant. They were engineered to wreck human bodies. Armor didn't guarantee survival. Wounds equals likely infection. Medical care equals none. Casualty rates in battles up to 50%. Prisoners often tortured or executed. Most knights died young, in pain, and anonymously. So when you dream of glorious combat, when you picture riding into battle with honor and pride, just remember, it wasn't cinematic, it wasn't heroic, it was dying in the mud with your guts hanging out. While a farmer in rags looted your boots. You survived training, you survived war. So now you're a respected knight, right? Feasting in castles, adored by peasants, free to live with honor? Not quite. Because being a knight wasn't freedom. It was a job, a burden, a performance. And if you couldn't keep up, you lost everything. Knights were expected to live by a code: chivalry, defend the weak, protect the church, serve your lord, behave with courtesy and courage. But let's be honest, it was more marketing than morality. Chivalry was propaganda, a way to polish the image of men whose job was violence. The church needed order. Lords needed loyalty. So they wrapped warfare in poetry and prayer. You were taught to appear noble, not necessarily be noble. Sure, you attended mass, bowed to ladies, swore oaths, but off the battlefield, many knights were bullies, extortionists, thugs with titles. The contradiction was built in. You were expected to show mercy, but also kill without hesitation. Be pious, but drink yourself blind. Fight for honor, but still take bribes. You were caught in a performance you couldn't stop playing. Let's talk money. Being a knight wasn't cheap. Your armor? Custom made, forged over months. Your war horse? Specially bred, trained, and fed. Your weapons, tents, servants, coats of arms, all of it cost more than you probably had. If you wanted to serve your lord, ride into tournaments, or lead troops, you had to pay for everything yourself. And no, knighthood didn't come with a salary. Some knights had land, others lived off gifts or occasional plunder, but many sank into debt. They borrowed from monasteries, merchants, or other nobles, and if they couldn't repay, they lost their armor, their horse, their title. Knighthood didn't guarantee wealth. It often destroyed it. If you were lucky enough to own land, congratulations. Now you were a tax collector, a petty judge, a militia recruiter, and a maintenance man all rolled into one. You weren't relaxing in a velvet chair with a goblet of wine. You were chasing down rent from starving peasants, fixing collapsing roofs, and mediating disputes about who stole whose pig. And the church? It wanted its tithe. Your lord? His cut. The king? His soldiers. Being landed meant being watched, being squeezed, and failing to deliver? That meant shame. Stripping of titles, or worse, accusations of treason. Knights swore oaths to lords of service, obedience, and fidelity. But those lords weren't saints. They used knights as tools. And if they lost power, so did you. One wrong allegiance and your name was mud. Your lands were seized, your family disgraced. You might be executed just for backing the wrong side in a feud. Medieval politics were a knife fight in a dark room. Shifting alliances, rival claims, church corruption, and knights were always the pawns. Even kings betrayed their own. Ask the Templars how that turned out. You might think knights won the hearts of fair maidens with bravery and charm. Try dowries and land deals. Marriage wasn't about romance. It was about alliances. Noble families used their daughters like chess pieces. If you were a younger son, your best hope was marrying a widow. If you had no land, no name, and no coin, forget it. Even so-called courtly love, serenading a lady, pledging devotion, was often just a fantasy, a ritual, something you did in poems and tournaments, not in life. And even if you did marry for love, don't get attached, because war, disease, childbirth, or betrayal took many before their time. Grief was part of the job. Let's say you beat the odds. You survived childhood, training, war, politics, and disease. What now? You were probably 40, scarred, arthritic, possibly half deaf or partially blind. Your joints ached from old injuries. Your teeth were gone. You limped. You drank to forget. There was no pension, no retirement plan. Some knights took religious vows to live in peace. Others became mercenaries. Some simply faded. Poor, forgotten, broken. Glory doesn't pay rent. Not when you can't lift a sword anymore. Cost to equip a knight. 5 to 10 years of a peasant's income, real income, inconsistent, often none. Chivalry, selectively applied, rarely followed. Landed knights, debt-ridden, overworked, legally exposed retirement, non-existent. Life expectancy, nearly 45 if lucky, most died younger. So the next time you imagine yourself riding under a banner, noble and free, remember this: knighthood wasn't liberty. It was a lifetime performance, under threat. You didn't rise, you served, you bled, you bowed, because a knight was never truly free. He was just armed. You've made it this far. You trained, you fought, you obeyed, you endured. But in the end, it doesn't matter. Because no matter how noble your title, how sharp your sword, or how loyal your heart, the medieval world had one final reward for every knight: pain, disease, death. Even if you somehow avoided war wounds or infection, your body still failed you. Years of combat left you bent and brittle. You couldn't sleep from back pain. Your hands ached from shattered knuckles. Knees popped, ankles swelled, spine compressed. You had no treatment, just leeches, poultices, or bloodletting. Maybe a bone setter yanked your limb into place without anesthesia. No ibuprofen, no ice packs, just prayer and endurance. And then came the real enemies. The knight's greatest opponent? Disease, not arrows, not swords, not even fire. It was the unseen, and it never showed mercy. You might survive a battle only to die from a fever a week later, from gangrene in your foot, from infected gums, from parasites burrowed in your gut. The Black Death? It didn't spare knights. Titles meant nothing to bacteria. If you got sick, your options were bleed it out, burn it off, die slowly. And that's assuming you were even diagnosed. Most doctors blamed bad air, demons, or imbalance of humors. They'd apply dung to wounds, feed you mercury, saw off infected limbs with dirty blades, while others held you down. Some knights died screaming, others simply rotted from the inside. But maybe you didn't die in battle or from plague. Maybe your fall was slower and quieter. Disgrace. You lost your lord's favor, failed in war, took the wrong side in politics. Suddenly, you're an outcast, stripped of rank, mocked by peers, your name erased from the rolls. There was no appeal, no second chance. You could go from respected knight to forgotten beggar in a week. Some ended as mercenaries, fighting for coin, not cause. Others turned to banditry. Yes, many ex-knights became criminals, raiding towns they once protected. Because survival doesn't care about honor. If you were rich, famous, and lucky, you might get buried in armor beneath a carved stone in a church. But if you died in war, you were left to rot, your corpse looted, your armor stripped, maybe tossed into a mass grave, maybe not buried at all. During the Black Death, bodies piled up so fast that entire pits were dug and dumped. Knight or peasant, you went in the same hole. In fact, some knights chose to be buried in humble graves, out of humility, or fear of grave robbers, because even in death, you weren't safe. Here's the cruel truth. Most knights who lived and died will never be remembered. Not because they weren't brave, but because they didn't matter. Your name wasn't carved in stone. Your deeds weren't sung by bards. You fought, you obeyed, you suffered. Then you vanished. Even the ones we do remember, often distorted, romanticized, sanitized, cleaned up by history to make the violence palatable. We turned killers into heroes, but we forgot the filth, the fear, the failure. Most real knights weren't Lancelot. They were broken men, clawing through a brutal system, until it chewed them up and spit them out. Retirement plan, none medical treatment, dangerous at best. Common end, disease, disgrace, or forgotten death legacy, unrecorded peaceful death in bed. Rare still think you were born in the wrong era. You'd eat rotten meat, bathe once a season, kill on command, live in debt, die in pain. And if you were very lucky, you'd be buried with your name spelled right. The knight was not a hero in shining armor. He was a blunt instrument, a tool of war, a prisoner of violence dressed up as glory. So romanticize the past all you want, but before you start dreaming of armor and chivalry, ask yourself, can you fight non-stop for a lord who would sell you out? Can you carry 70 pounds in full heat while your body bleeds? Can you kill a child with a spear and still sleep at night? Can you die unknown, unpaid, and unmourned? You wouldn't become a knight. You'd become a body in the mud.